This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is Sarah Tabor and her YouTube channel, Farm to Tabor. The conversation will begin in a moment. Sarah Tabor is my guest. She runs a YouTube channel called Farm to Tabor. She specializes in talking about agriculture, and we'll be talking about the YouTube channel, agriculture, politics, and whatnot. So, welcome, Sarah. I like to give my guests all a few minutes to declaim who they are, what they do, and their life's passion, etc. So, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Tabor. I am a small farmer and I came up in agriculture as a farm worker. I did not grow up on a farm. I grew up working on other people's farms. Um, for whatever reason, still liked it, didn't like working indoors, and kept working my way through manual labor jobs. Realized that was not going to pan out if I'm trying to raise a family. Went to some more school, and now we're here, worked in agriculture all over the US. Um, we're here in North Carolina because that's where my husband got his job. My family's from the South, so it's, Southerner by birth, North Carolinian by choice. And we're just growing veggies here in North Carolina now. Yeah, I've been adding some wholesale customers this year, just trying to get the business up and moving. And it's a wild time for farm news. And so, I've been active on social media for a while and just thought, you know, it's a nice way to say this. There's a certain party line in agriculture. Everybody's been vetted by the farm lobby, and there's other people in agriculture who are not into that, and our voices don't get heard very often. So, um, just thought it's a good time to talk about kind of an inside view of agriculture that is not the party line. It's about time that folks heard about that. So, we're just trying to say there was an oh, hang on, alarm is going off. Whoa, okay. They say there's like an iron curtain in the Soviet Union days. There's a little bit of a farm lobby talking points curtain where those of us who aren't into that have a hard time getting the word out. So just decided, you know, we don't have to do this anymore. We have social media now, so we're talking about it. So that's what brought us here.
What might we call it, a kudzu curtain?
Well, I think at this point, most kudzu being grown is not being grown on purpose. So I don't know if
Yeah.
we'll call that agricultural, but yeah.
So let me just ask a little bit, since you said you grew up working on farms. Did you come from a sharecropping background? Your father and grandfather, etc.
No, my great grandparents did. My grandpa grew
Hmm.
up in a sharecropping family. My grandma grew up in a not exactly sharecropper, but he was working for farmers as well, family. And so definitely learned a lot from that background. They made sure their kids got out of agriculture.
Hmm.
And so coming back to it under your own power on purpose has been a really interesting experience.
So how many years did you work doing actual physical labor?
Well, started at 14. And agriculture, for most people who work in agriculture, you may or may not be in there all time, full time. It's one of many gigs you may take because it's temporary jobs, right?
Mm.
The harvest may only last a few weeks, so that's a job you take for a while, then you move on to the next thing. So there was a rotation of school, farm work, and so like summer jobs, and worked in factories, worked in labs, once I
Yeah.
went off to college, worked in garment shop, so just like standard odd jobs, was like shoveling stables for a while, help somebody remove trees from their property, that kind of thing, some casual lumberjacking going on there. Took some jobs working in a bee research lab, so we were doing beekeeping. Took a lot of jobs working for folks doing greenhouse research, so worked in greenhouses for a while. This is when I was in school, you pay your way through school working through with university jobs. And then funny enough, once I had finished grad school, once I had a doctorate, boom, right back in the field
Mm.
because it was in the middle of the Great Recession. So I was working for the university there, but a big part of the program that they had in agriculture was, on occasion their student and graduate workers would get loaned out to farmers. So you're boom, right back on the field crew with, just with the immigrants, you're just in there working. And it was it was kind of funny because they'll say stuff like, "Oh, you can never get Americans to work on these crews," but if you're keeping up, they just assume you're not American. So it's a little bit of a circular logic there.
Yeah. So let me just ask you then, if you've experienced this, you probably have. I've worked mostly blue collar jobs. I've done lots of stuff. I've done day jobs. When I was younger, I've worked maybe 25 years now in the grocery industry, but that's out of I'm 60 years old. I started working when I was 6, but I was certainly in urban work and that kind of stuff, warehouses, uh, delivery, that kind of thing. Have you noticed? Maybe it's different, but I doubt it. What is the way that most people relate when they find out that you were or have worked physical labor in the past? Is there a sort of a downward sneer to it, like, oh, that's not a real job? And how did you come to grips with that on a personal level?
Honestly, I think a lot of the time it just kind of bounces off because, if you're clean cut and articulate, they're just like, no, that doesn't make sense. Anyway,
Mm,
next. And then um, there's a lot of people who do it for life, right?
mhm.
And so that's going to do certain things to your body.
Yeah.
And because I was able to get out fairly early, like in my, mid 20s ish, like I was able to take care of my health in a different way, right? So you don't look like someone who's done manual labor, and that like you don't feel like I've had other health issues, but um, this is a weird thing, right? So you'll find a lot of folks in like upper class circles who are like, oh, I'm like a cowboy. You'll get the George W. Bush syndrome, and they just kind of grew up in a family that had a ranch. That's about the extent of it, right? Um, Actually having worked your way up and kind of like had to propel yourself out of that is a different trajectory, and having actually done that your whole life is a very different trajectory too. So it's kind of wild being in, when you're in more polite circles, just the fact that you actually did manual labor for several years is like, wow, that's crazy. But I did it for several years, was able to get out, right? Which is like, there's a lot of people who've not been able to do that. Sometimes that's the job you prefer, but then sometimes it's like my body is busted and I can't get out. That's
Mm.
also a very real cycle, right, for people. So um, it's kind of weird going out there and going like, oh yeah, I'm a blue collar person because I also went to grad school. Like I have a doctorate as well.
Mhm.
I am a crop scientist. I am now middle class. Like I feel like I kind of, there was a rough start and I was able to make it out. Um, again, like blue collar jobs don't pay poorly for everybody. They can pay quite well. Just that was not the situation I was in. I like had to move on. Um, but I think when you're talking to blue collar audiences, it's like, yeah, I was, there for a few years. This is not my entire life. Talking to white collar audiences, like, wow, you were there for a few years. Wow, that's so intense, right? And so it's very, I don't know, that's the state of things.
Yeah. I know I tell my wife, who's never really worked a lot of physical jobs except maybe as a cashier when she was younger, like I've been off for 9 days. This is day 8, and it was a couple of days ago that my back sort of finally decompressed because I've been working many years on concrete floors, and I'm certainly not built like a Schwarzenegger kind of person, but the one positive is the physical labor. You don't have to go to a gym. But then, there are other things. I've had a couple of hernias and that kind of thing. And people, when they see that, or learn about that about you, they do have these kinds of odd things like, why would you do that to yourself? And me, for example, blue collar jobs are a way to keep my mind free because I'm a writer, I'm creative, and if I were having to pay attention to doing a bookkeeping job, it would just kill my creativity. So to free the time up to do that, and a similar thing with you with your doctorate. So let me talk about how you got involved in YouTube, or why did you want to do YouTube? Because it looks like you are almost one of these people. I've seen enough YouTube channels that seems poised to make good money eventually, because you tend to average in the tens of thousands for some of your videos. You've been doing it for about a few years, and it seems that if one or two videos takes off and gets you 1.2 million views or something, it's going to be good for you financially. So, what was your approach? What is your aims? What is the end goal other than say making money?
Yeah, great question. And like it kind of going back to the like actually working with your body thing. Transitioning to white collar labor, which is like I feel like YouTube is just a whole nother level of transitioning to white collar labor. I've never been this sedentary professionally before. Like I still have a farm running, but it's kind of slowing down now, and so I'm not used to sitting around as much. I'm kind of like going spoolie a little bit. I still have a farm. I work on it quite a bit. I do most of the work myself. But that's a choice I get to make, and I get to stop if something hurts, which is an
Yeah.
option I didn't have before. But yeah, so YouTube, the sedentary life. Yeah, it's going well. So I just started doing YouTube seriously, I think back in April this year, but I've been doing social media for a while before that. So I already had an audience on other platforms. I did Twitter for a while, had a lot of people follow me there. Of course, Twitter is not what it was. And so I realized I need to do something else. Um, so moved over to YouTube. Big learning curve there. Um, it's kind of funny because I'm not a creative by training or profession or really inclination, you know. And so, like I can write, I can get stuff, I can get thoughts out, but learning to do video has been a whole process. And learning to do it in a way that is pleasant to watch, that gets the information across without making me want to tear my hair out, that's a whole process. Um, Fortunately, I've been able to get some really good help because, like you said, we're making enough money on ad revenue now that I can afford to pay people to help edit and do things like that. Um, so like having that up and like anytime you start video is a lot more commitment than Twitter. Um, like Twitter, you can just like I had a thought, boom, bang it
Yeah.
out 30 seconds later, it's out there. With video, yes, it has to be very premeditated. There's a whole process. You have to chew on it for a little bit. Just you have to make a script, shoot it, make sure it looks good, edit it, get it posted. It's a whole thing. Um, and so like thank heavens there's some money in it because to do it in any sustainable way, like you do have to have some help. Um, I don't know if how widely known this is, but the days of like just kind of hanging out in your bedroom, YouTubing into webcam, I think those are kind of over. Like I hope they aren't. I don't want it to be that way, but I was kind of told when I was starting out, yeah, you can't do that. You're gonna have to make it look good, you know. And I've definitely noticed that the more professional I make it look, the more like the more people actually tune into what you have to say. So um, as someone who's not a creative by training or inclination, that's been a learning process, to try and figure that out. But yeah, trying to, I don't know, just a viable business model, what that looks like. Again, I've gotten it to a point where I can afford to pay the folks who are helping me, which I was committed to doing beforehand. We were kind of like, I had some savings set aside to do that, and we were plummeting through it. And so we just kind of like finally leveled out, like just in time. Um, so feeling very fortunate with that. Now we're getting enough views that it's like, I say we because there's like a whole team involved, but like now we're getting enough views that it might make sense to start doing sponsorships. Okay, well, who's going to do an ad on this kind of material? That's the kind
Yeah,
of
I don't
the
think you're
question
gonna
for me,
get.
right?
I don't think you're gonna get ConAgra or something sponsoring
Yeah,
that.
they're not a direct to consumer brand that advertises on YouTube anyway, so that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just a brief thing. Farm to table. The play on farm to table, right?
Mhm. Yeah, that was a friend of ours. I can't take the credit for that one. He said you should call it this, and then I realized I don't have a better idea. So credit where it's
Well,
due.
I'm
Thanks,
assuming
Brett.
that's your married name. If your name was the Schwarzkopf, it wouldn't have been as poetic there. Um,
Yeah, we got lucky there.
yeah. So before we talk about some of your pet peeves, your political views, and some of the, the videos that are the most piquant there, I just wanted to ask a couple of general questions. One of the more, I think, worthwhile things that agriculturally has been done in the last few decades is the Svalbard seed vault in case something went titanically wrong with the atmosphere or global warming, and we're saving an actual genetic history if we ever needed to be like Noah coming off the ark. Um, what is your take on that kind of thing? Do we need more seed vaults, do you think? Do we need other projects that preserve things before we burn through them in our human greed and lust?
Sure. So just like quick disclaimer, that's really not the part of agriculture I work in.
Yeah.
So I have done a lot of work in plant breeding and genetics where we just take, I'll give you an example. So it was in Florida. It was the lab that created the southern high bush blueberry. There's no genetic engineering going on there. We just cross a few different kinds of plants to get something different out of it. So what they did was they realized, northern blueberries, from like New Jersey and Canada taste really good, but they cannot handle the weather in the South. Now, if we could get a blueberry that you can grow in the South, then we could get blueberries earlier in the spring. We
Mm.
could have a good crop for folks in Florida to grow that isn't just oranges, right? Um, and so they spent 20 years um, and then some, breeding together the good blueberries from up north with wild blueberry relatives down south that could handle our weather great, but they were kind of tree sized.
Yeah.
And they had really tiny, seedy, dry, hard berries. So they're not edible really for humans, right? And so they spent 20 plus years crossbreeding those things until we got a blueberry plant, several blueberry plants that like the weather in Florida and make good tasting blueberries. So that's how the southern highbush blueberry came to exist. And so, situations are always changing, right? The things that people need and also our climate and like where land is available to farm, that's always changing. And so just from the perspective of somebody who's trying to breed something new, you can't do that if we didn't have the wild relatives,
Yeah.
right, to cross with. And so seed vaults that save historical breeds of crops are really important, but so is preserving wild plants, right? And that's something that gets a little bit less attention. Like everybody loves to save pandas, and like even cool shiny bugs. The animals get a lot of attention, but saving plants and like preserving plants is really, really important. And I don't think you can build a seed vault big enough, to hold all the wild plants. And things like a cold seed vault only work for temperate species, right? Things like grains, legumes, things where there's a nice dry hard seed that can handle cold weather. You can't save a coconut like that, and all these wild palm relatives, right? Tropical plants, they often have seeds that just don't last very long. You can't store them in a vault at all. Or they're clonally propagated where they reproduce by runners. And so you can't store seeds. It's only live plant. That's all you have. And so seed vaults are great for temperate seeds for northern climates and higher latitudes down south as well. But to really have good food security, you also need to keep your wild plants with you. And that only happens when you keep wildland wild, to be honest with you. That's a whole other part of the food security picture that really gets ignored.
So two other questions, and then we'll move on to the YouTube stuff. When I was a little boy, there was a thing called seasonal foods, where there was you'd go 2 or 3 months and you wouldn't have cherries, or you wouldn't have blueberries, or you wouldn't have this or that, and then we did this where now we can import from the Middle East, from Chile, from Australia, and year round we can have whatever we want. What is your opinion on that in terms of the carbon footprint and a green way? Is it healthier and is it more carbon friendly if we went back to seasonal eating?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to be a renegade here and say eating fresh produce is better than not eating fresh produce. Yes, even in the winter, And people had some health problems when they didn't do that, right? So there are a couple things that go into shipping food long distance. One is people are eating out of season, but also there are a couple different ways to get fresh food and fresh produce in, outside of your growing season. Shipping in long distance is only one way. There's also greenhouses. Mm-hmm. Greenhouses can also use a lot of carbon, unless you're putting them next to other facilities that are already making waste heat. That could be power plants. They're already making waste heat and carbon dioxide. You go and put them you can put them next to a whole lot of kind of industrial facilities. Obviously not something that makes like, lead exhaust, but like data centers are going to make a lot of waste heat, right? So you can pair greenhouses with these things. And you see that happen in most wealthy countries in the world. You got the Netherlands is very famous for this. Spain does a lot of this. Japan also quite a bit, but even China and Mexico are getting really big into greenhouses. The United States is one of the only wealthy countries in the world that doesn't do greenhouses. Because we just got in the habit of shipping things, because we have, like North America's got a nice long north-south axis. There's always something in season somewhere. And so we just really got in the habit of long-distance shipping. We also have a whole lot of, when people talk about why we do agriculture the way we do it, they always talk in terms of policy. This is what the policy is, and farmers are forced to do things this way because of policy. I want to ask you, where does policy come from? Do we go camp out at Mount Sinai and we wait for God to hand our farm policy down on carved? No, we make our farm policy. So this farm policy forces, stop. Why did we make the farm policy this way? We made our farm policy to favor broad-scale fruit, not fruits and vegetables, broad-scale grains, because it's simpler. Because folks who are doing agriculture tend to prefer to do less work if they can get, all other things being equal, less work is more, right? That's going to get me in a lot of trouble, right? I never want to say anything in agriculture is easy. Growing corn and soybeans is not easy, but compared to the workload of building a greenhouse and then staffing it year round, that's even more work,
Yeah.
right? And so I really wish we stopped fixating on policy as the answer because we made the policy. We're the ones who made that, you know. And U.S. policy has just really prioritized not doing like every other wealthy country in the world has done a lot more work in greenhouses and just supplying their own fresh food that way. Not every country, not every wealthy country is supplying all their fresh produce that way. I don't think it necessarily makes sense to grow, you know, strawberries in the middle of winter in Minnesota. I don't know if that's logical, but you can certainly do that in North Carolina and ship them from North Carolina instead of perhaps Mexico, right? Um, or like even if you put it like next to a facility that's producing heat, it's free heat. So people talk a lot about the concern about the cost of running a greenhouse. It doesn't have to be that way. There's ways to get that heat. Um, but that's just not something we've really worked on in any of our policy, our industrial policy, our farm policy, any of that. That's just never really been something we thought, oh, we should do that. And so when this issue gets turned into an issue of food miles, well, now we're just agreeing to the premise that food has to come from a long ways away if it's not immediately in season. That is a uniquely American assumption to make. It does not have to be done that way. So again, as a little bit of an outlier in agriculture, I think greenhouses aren't the answer to everything, but they are a big answer to a lot of things, and it's one that we have really kind of left on the table.
Another issue that I remember another aspect that has gotten worse since my youth was the diversity, genetically speaking, of different types of foods. I remember when there were more than just Cavendish bananas. There were red bananas and purple bananas. I remember when we had black carrots and red carrots and purple carrots. Um, uh, do you think that is that part of what you mean when you talk about food insecurity? Because if let's say we got a mold or a fungus that wiped out all the Cavendish bananas, well, they're 99% of bananas, at least here in the U.S. Maybe around the world there are a few others. What what do you think of the modern lack of diversity in, say, a produce aisle or even at a farmer's market?
Well, all those other types of produce are still out there. I just pulled out I just weeded some red carrots that I'm growing like yesterday.
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot more veggies out there than the stuff we get at the supermarket. I would say it's less an issue of genetic diversity and it's about marketing. That's what people buy, right? And again, like it's kind of like policy. You can't just blame what people buy because people buy what's in the grocery store, right? Um, but like all those different varieties of stuff are still out there.
But
So
they would be prohibitively expensive compared to, say, the Cavendish banana, which is,
it depends. Like
yeah.
mostly usually they just don't ship as well.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, they're perfectly fine to grow, but they just don't ship as well. And so, I mean, you can ship them. Like, growing them is fine. Just shipping them, to Los Angeles or Nebraska is going to be like that's going to be costly because you're going to lose so many in transport. At which point you wind up with a lot of food waste. Then you have people going, "Oh no, food waste." I'm like, "Well, do you want to?" like, that's why a lot of the things that are the mass market variety are the mass market variety. They handle shipping very well. And
Mm.
again, if you've got a food system that's based on shipping things long distance, you either have something that ships well or you lose a lot of it during shipping. You either have food loss or you have a very narrow like selection of produce. So uh, I don't know, like as someone who works with plants professionally, I'm like, there's so much more stuff out there than what is in the grocery store. Um, it's more an issue of shipping, and it's more an issue of marketing than it is like what plants are out there, like what plants exist.
So, one of your videos is called "Our Food Security Problem." So, How do you define food security, and why is that an issue?
Sure. So there's a few different types, like areas of food security, right? So we talked about one where you need to have wild plants available to crossbreed with your new plants. If you need
Mm.
some source of disease resistance, like being able to grow it in a new place or the weather has changed. So you need some different, weather handling traits. You need to have your wild plants out there. That's a very long-term type of food security. That's one part of it. There's also your basic day-to-day food security, which, and a lot of people define this as you have to grow your food in your own country. I don't think autarky is really the goal here. I think the most basic issue in food security is people can afford enough food to eat. And I think that because I used to struggle with that quite a bit, growing up poor and then going to school. I was in grad school, working in agriculture, growing food, and then had my daughter, during grad school. And so we were very broke parents. and you're surrounded by food. And fortunately, you can just kind of like, after you do your blueberry trial and you pick all the blueberries and weigh them, you can just take them home, which was really, really handy because we were both very, didn't have a lot of cash, and we were also just overworked all the time, right? So typically, this is a stereotype, I don't think it's really true, but the idea is if you have a lot of money, it's because you're working all the time and you're super busy, so you order takeout. And if you're poor, it's because you don't work that much, and so you can afford to cook from scratch. I don't think that's how being poor actually works in real life, but that's the stereotype, you know? And so we were both very cash strapped and also didn't have a lot of time because we were parents and we were both in grad school, right? So you just don't have a lot of time or money available to you. And so I lost so much weight. My teeth have not recovered. They will never be the same. So it's kind of funny too, because like food insecurity, we had enough money that we could have eaten fine if we had the time to cook from scratch, but we couldn't do that, right? And so we did not have enough money to buy takeout, and so we were just hungry all the time. And that's another area of food security, right? There's having enough food, but there's also actually being able to use it. I think a lot of this is kind of related to this. There's a lot of panic over like, oh, fast food, we're all addicted. I would want us to put a pause in that and say, is it that we're addicted to fast food, or is it we don't have time to do anything else? That's a very different problem with a very different solution, right? I would kind of lean more towards it's the having the time availability to cook and clean up after yourself and do the meal planning and do the shopping and like get things that are fresh. You might have to go to the grocery store multiple times a week. If you don't have a car, that may just not work out. So food security is a lot of different things. I would say when the rubber really hits the road, it is having the money and the time to eat properly. And that's going to look different for a lot of different people, but that is what it comes down to. And when it comes to like national food security, we're talking a very different thing, right? We're talking, does the food have enough food to feed itself? And that can come through growing it yourself. It can also come through having steady trade relationships where you import it, and your trade partners also have a steady supply, right? That comes from having a stable government that can keep up with trade agreements. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
That is not where we're at as a country right now. The national food supply in the U.S. has changed quite a bit. Traditionally, what we have done in the U.S. is we focus on your breadbasket staples, right? Meat, potatoes, grain, dairy, eggs. And we export those because we make a lot of that. We have a lot of land that is really well suited towards that compared to the amount of people we have to feed in this country. So we grow a lot of those breadbasket staples, we eat them, and we export extras. And then we import stuff we can't grow here, like fancy French wine and like mangoes and sugar and tea and coffee. That has been the traditional U.S. approach. That is breaking down. We are not even growing enough of the breadbasket staples anymore to feed ourselves. We are net importers of potatoes. We are net importers of ketchup. We are importing a lot more bread than a breadbasket country ought to. So, and when it comes to talking about food security, it's certainly not because we don't have enough land. We're growing 4,000 calories worth of stuff, for every person in this country is my understanding. But a lot of that is soybeans and other bulk crops for export. And this is kind of getting back into the food policy thing, right? Policy forces us to farm this way. Well, where did the policy come from? At the end of the day, all other things being equal, as a farmer, and I will say this as a small farmer, you want to, this is the same for every person in every walk of life. You want to get as much bang for your buck as possible. You want to get as much reward for as little effort as possible. That's everybody. In agriculture, the thing that does that right now, in a whole lot of the U.S., is just growing soybeans for export to China. And it's not fully an agricultural thing. There's also like food processing. We grow a lot of peanuts, but we ship it overseas to get turned into peanut butter and import it back, right? So that's a bulk crop we are very successfully growing, but we haven't been investing in food handling capacity. So that's both what is being grown on our land has been tilted towards exports, and even things that are export friendly that we want to use, we're not doing the handling so much anymore. So there's a few different causes, we could dig into why that is, but that is something also that goes beyond agricultural policy, right? Because in my experience working with food handling, I find that a lot of people just say that it's too hard. They're like, and food safety laws are always the thing to point to. And they go, oh, it's too hard. Oh, what do you mean? Every person who's actually carrying this out in your food handling facility, uh, usually English is not their first language and they may not have finished high school and they're still doing it just fine. So what do you mean the problem is it's too hard? That's not really what's going on, right? Um, they should, like, as a business owner, it's just, having to meet other people's expectations is kind of a downer. And it just makes it more complicated than you wanted it to be. Um, I would say a lot of this just has to do with who our business ownership class is. It's folks who kind of there's not a lot of upward mobility in the U.S. right now, and so people who have the money to do food handling, um, it's like you would think it's all ConAgra, but no, a lot of the food handling in the U.S. is done by like privately owned like family businesses still, and the folks who are new to food handling, there tend to be a lot of like startup types. Startup types tend to not actually be in it to do a whole lot of it. Like, they're not in it for love of the craft, right? They're in it to find regulatory loopholes, exploit them, and get out, right? So this is not the kind of person or financial, situation that is interested in building like long-term sustainable, stable food supply. So we just kind of went through a few different areas there. Farm policy is part of it, but we really just stopped blaming everything that happens in the food system on food policy and farm policy because number one, we wrote that. Number two, there's other players in it. It's what kind of people are in the business world. Why are they there? What do they want? And is that compatible with building food?
Sarah, one of the interesting things about your YouTube channel is that a lot of the videos are very politically based. You're talking about the different classes. You're talking about Trump's influence on things. You're talking about one of the videos that was very striking was about how farmers are now complaining about the very things that they voted for. So let me just ask you before we talk about your specific views on certain things in agriculture. What was your family's political history and your personal political history? Were you always towards the more liberal side, or were you God-fearing Bible belters?
Yeah, so I was very conservative religious upbringing, honestly. Grew up a lot hearing very much about the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And boy, that's been useful lately.
Yeah.
I don't think it's kind of funny because I actually ran for Commissioner of Agriculture in my state of North Carolina last year,
Yeah, I saw that.
as the Democrat, and so we've kind of already put our stake in the sand there. Um, but I would tell people I'd worked with in agriculture for a while, said, "Hey, I'm running," and they're like, "Oh, I'm like as the Democrat," and they go, "Well, agriculture shouldn't be political." I'm like, "Well, I'm not the one who made it partisan. Also, I agree, agriculture shouldn't be political, and the farm sector has really picked some sides here,
Mm-hmm.
and we should talk about that." And it's only called political if you don't pick the same side as everybody else. Then it's political.
Yeah.
Um, Agriculture has really done a lot of work to give itself a reputation as being the beating heart of democracy, right? As long as there's farmers out there, then real America will be okay. That is really out of step with what we're actually doing. And I
Mm-hmm.
say we farmers, because that is a group that I'm a part of. We as farmers have really been making some choices here that are not in step with this idea of being the wellspring of democracy. Um, if you look around the world in the history of dictators, no matter how much they are thrashing their country, they can't stay in power on their own, right? They need supporters of some kind somewhere. Most dictators will have some rich friends who are doing really well as a result of their power. You've got Putin, handing out, mineral and oil contracts to his buddies. That's really how he's managed to stay in power. You keep the oligarchs happy. You keep some folks in the military happy. You're good to go. Doesn't matter how much you abuse the common people, as long as you've got 10 or 20 oligarchs on your side, you're going to be okay. So that is a pattern that we have with dictatorship. You take from the public trough. You skim from millions and millions and millions of people, and you hand it out to 10 or 20 people.
Mm-hmm.
You hand it out to a relatively small group. And to be fair to Putin, it's not just the oligarchs and his generals. He's also keeping retirees in Russia very happy. That's a fairly large group, right? That's also millions and millions of people. A big part of what he does is he takes oil and gas revenues, what remains of what, after you hand out stuff to the oligarchs, you take what's left over and hand it out to the retirees. And it's a big enough age block, or retirees are a big enough population block in Russia that as long as he can keep the retirees and the oligarchs happy, then he's good to go, right? So even when he's keeping the oligarchs happy, that's not quite enough. So I look at the position farmers are having in our society right now. And certainly we have tech oligarchs and billionaires in the country who are making out very well right now under Trump. But you have to keep at least some common people-ish happy, right? And I look at how farms are demanding bailouts. This is going to be their third bailout of the year, right? And this bailout is happening, the need for this is happening as a result of something that farmers voted for. Trump ran on, I'm going to start another trade war with China, our number one customer. He ran on that. And it also happened the first time he was president. So it's kind of funny because I've heard people say, like, oh, well, the farmers were lied to. No, we were not. Farmers knew this was going to happen. It was known. You don't need to make excuses for people in that way. It was known in the farm sector this was going to happen. I actually talked with some folks. I had to sit down with some people when I was running. It was a conservative interest group who was already running attack ads on me. And I said, hey, we should meet first. Let's talk. Like, get me dinner first. Come on. And, and I just kind of said to him, I was like, okay, real talk, cards on the table. We both know this is going to happen, right? We both know Trump is going to relaunch the trade war, and you guys are rooting for him. Tell me about this. Tell me about the logic here. And they said, well, we understand that there will be some challenges, but there are also going to be some benefits that come with supporting Trump. There are also going to be some benefits. So, I've just had an eye out for what those benefits are. And I've noticed that there are already some issues with slavery happening under the table in the H-2A program. It's like a farm worker visa program.
Yeah.
That was already an issue that's happening kind of under the table. The Biden administration put in some anti-slavery controls and upgrades to the H-2A system in 2024. Those were rolled back by Trump in 2025 in June. He also recently lowered the H-2A minimum wage by $2 to $3 an hour in most parts of the U.S. and is now rapidly expanding the H-2A program. So these ICE raids we're looking at are only half the story. It's not just that we don't want immigrants. We want the immigrants who are in the country to be in the H-2A program where they're a lot easier to control. And that's why that is the case in the H-2A program is like a whole deep dive on its own. But it's not about getting immigrants out of the country. It's about putting them in a position where they're a lot easier to control and you don't have to pay them as much. So that's a benefit. The expectation of another bailout or bailouts, I think, is also another benefit. They were, paid back for what they lost in the first administration. So why would you assume it'd be different this time? I think there was a belief that, there'd be a hit, but in time it would be okay. You'll see in the farm press when people are talking about it, when they're expressing why they still support Trump, they'll say, we know there's going to be a temporary problem, but after that, things are going to be a lot better. There's no way that's going to come from a renormalization of trade. China now gets all the soybeans it needs from Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, other countries. That market's never coming back. So the only possible way things can go back to normal, unless they're talking about totally changing how they farm, which they're not, the only possible way for things to go back to normal is permanent bailouts. That's the only way for the math to work out. And given that those happened last time, I think it's pretty fair to say a lot of people are expecting that. If you go up and ask them point blank, they'll say, no, we don't want bailouts, we want markets. We can do math on how much demand there is for these products in the world. We can all do the math for that. In agriculture, that's our job. There's no way this market is ever coming back. So don't do the thing that gets rid of your market and then tell me what you want as a market. Because your mouth is saying one thing, but what you're doing is saying another.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a partisanship thing. That is a common sense and observing what's happening in the marketplace thing. The fact that some people are making that political is their problem.
So it seems to me then that this is setting up a way to push these small farmers out and corporatize it more. As someone who's an outsider, a layman when it comes to this thing, it brings me back to the term that first became popular when Reagan was president, which is predatory capitalism. First, it was initially on Wall Street, where some tycoon would come in, he'd buy up his competitors, and then once everything was fully market capitalized, he'd then break things up into smaller companies again, sell them off, and most of the times they would die on the vine. Then you got the 2008 mortgage crisis, which was also different than the Reagan stuff, but certainly would fall under the predatory capitalism rubric. In watching a few of your videos, that's the term that immediately came to mind with some of them. Number one, is that a correct presumption for me to make, that we could call this predatory capitalism what's happened to the farm economy over the last decade or so? And if so, how do we reverse that?
Sure, but I think predatory capitalism in a very different way than most folks are used to looking at it. So this is what happened with housing in the 2008 crash, right? Is a lot of people lost their homes and the banks bought them up. And so that's our mental model for how this kind of thing works. I think agriculture is going to turn out very differently. I think okay, this is the funny thing that I hear people say. They're like, "Oh, we all know the small farmers aren't going to get the bailouts." We all know this, right? I'm a small farmer. I'm not. That's not happening for me, right? I don't grow the kinds of crops that get those programs. Um, so I'll hear people say that. We know the small farmers aren't going to get the bailouts. But at the same time, I'll also hear people say, we have to have bailouts to save the small farms or they'll get bought out. Well, which is it? Like, we got to make up our minds here. So I will tell you what I think is going on. Here's the thing you need to know about small family farmers in the U.S. Most small family farmers in the U.S. are millionaires with a six-figure income. That's close to 9 out of 10 farmers in the U.S. are small family farmers. And most of those small family farmers are millionaires with a six-figure income from a day job, and the farm is kind of just a side hustle, right? In fact, most farms in the U.S. are supported by a day job.
Yeah.
A small farm is not big enough to lose a lot of money on soybeans. You know who is? The big guys.
Yeah.
That's who's going to get wiped out. It's the big guys. The point, what a bailout is going to do is keep the big guys from getting wiped out. It's so funny too, because you'll see on the news, you'll see farmers going like, I'm just a small family farmer and I'm going to lose this much money on my 1,000 acres of soybeans. They're in Ohio. The average farm in Ohio is under 200 acres. You're working with, and if you've got 1,000 acres of soybeans, you've got 1,000 acres of corn too. So you're working with something like 10 times the size of the average family farm in Ohio. Honey, you're not a small family farmer, okay? You might not be as big as some of the biggest guys, but you are not a small family farmer. Mm-hmm. So that's a big piece of sand they're throwing in our eyes right now, is they're taking these rather large-scale operations who may not be as big as some of the other guys, but they feel small because they're not the biggest of the big, and they're putting them on the news and saying, look, this is a small family farmer, you have to save them. You can't lose hundreds of thousands of dollars on thousands of acres of soybeans if you are a small farmer. Yeah. Look, I hate to have to point out the map like that, but that is how it works, right? So who's going to win from these bailouts is the biggest operations. Who's going to go under is the biggest operations. And we actually have historical precedent from times in the U.S. when the biggest operations were suffering and we didn't bail them out, and then smaller farms took over and they've been there ever since. We kind of have this narrative in our heads that farms only ever get bigger and bigger and bigger through consolidation. But you have places like the Red River Valley in Minnesota and North Dakota, where the first farms to go there were not small family farms. It was big operations. It's funny too, because if you read the history books, they'll tell you it was big investor-owned corporations. But if you actually read the documents of who owned the deeds, it was family farms. They just happened to have 50,000 acres. It was very large. They called them corporate because they were big. And when we think big, it has to be a corporation. These were large estates run by families. Big, I think the entry level for these things was 10,000 acres. The biggest one was 66,000 acres. And this was in the 1870s. That was normal at the time. And they just coasted for a few years. They called them bonanza farms. They grew lots and lots and lots of wheat. And then the prices dropped. And they weren't happy with it, but the idea of farm bailouts did not really exist at the time, and so they didn't get them. And the people who had those operations were there to make money. And when it stopped working, you know what they did? They sold the land to family farms. And that place has been family farms ever since. They kind of range from like 400 to 1,500 acres. And they've gotten bigger over the last 100 years, but they're still a lot smaller than they were in the 1870s. And so we kind of have, again, this story in our head that farms only ever get bigger and bigger. that there's no way to stop it. And I will tell you, they can get a lot smaller. We know exactly how to stop it. It is stop bailing the big guys out. They're there to make money, and when it stops working, they'll go. There are a lot of ways that, like, as a small family farmer, I don't necessarily believe that we're inherently better. I think big farms can be fine as long as they're being responsible, paying people well, treating the environment right, have a good business model. I've worked with operations that do that. I'm like, hats off to you. You're doing that, and you're doing it a lot. That's fantastic. But the idea that bailouts are to save small family farms is ridiculous. Like, I don't know why people believe that. Like, we all know that's not who gets the bailouts, right? So why are we telling ourselves we have to do this or the small family farms are going to suffer? It's the big guys who are going to suffer the most. And if you're worried about hedge funds and private equity investors buying up farmland, why are they doing that? It's because we treat farms as too important to fail. That means if you own farmland, that's guaranteed income at taxpayer expense. Private equity investors love that.
Yeah.
There's ways to manage risk that farmers can do on our own using our knowledge, our experience, instead of just asking the tech, like growing a crop that we know has no market. That when people planted soybeans this spring, they knew we were not going to be selling to China. That's half our market gone. They knew that when they planted it. You do not get food security by telling people you plant something that has no market and will make you whole. That's not how you get food security. And you especially don't do that by having private equity people buy up miles and miles of farmland and give them that guarantee on the taxpayer's back. That is not how you build a functional food system. But that is what we're being told effectively we have to do. That's what the bailouts are going to be.
And it would seem to me that it also discourages rotation of crops. If you producing the soybeans and you know you can't sell them, it would have been more profitable for that farm to knowing that in advance to go for some other crop. It's almost as if it's just knowing you're heading towards the iceberg, and then when you hit it, crying about it, even though you could have swerved 3 miles before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something you hear pretty often when you talk about, well, couldn't we have grown something else, is, but my local elevator won't take anything else. It's corn and soybean and maybe wheat, that's it. To which I would say, that might have been a valid excuse 100 years ago when there was just the railroad depot, but you can rent trucks now. You can buy a grain bin. I hate to be that guy, but you are not actually trapped to what your local silo and elevator decide to do. You are an independent business, and you can decide to do other things. You may need to find a niche market. There's nobody out there putting a gun to your head telling you have to farm this way.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a thing that exists. Many people may choose to farm in the way that all their neighbors do it just because that's a known quantity, right? That's what we know how to do. I know I can just take my product to the elevator and sell it there. But then if you're doing the same thing everybody else does, then there's going to be a really high supply of the thing that you're all growing, right? And what happens when there's a high supply? We know the price drops. That's basic supply and demand. It kind of reminds me of, like, you ever go to Little League soccer and it's just like a blob of kids chasing the ball around?
Yeah.
If you want to be one of the farmers in the blob chasing the ball around, doing the same exact thing as all the other farmers, you can expect to not score many goals. If you want to be a little more strategic and break out of the pack and actually have a strategy, you can do that. Nobody's stopping you. And that is a message that is not very popular in farm country, because then that kind of makes it sound like it's our responsibility to see to our own financial success as businesses, which I would say is the truth. And a lot of people don't want to take that responsibility. And it is what it is. So you'll hear a lot of the time that, like, oh, but farmers have to do it this way again because of policy or because that's what the elevator does. There's this whole list of excuses. And I've worked with some folks on how to build a functional farm business that can actually support them. And the number one thing we did was train ourselves to stop taking our own excuses. That's a little bit of a harsh message. Back when I was running for Commissioner of Agriculture, I tried to give it in as friendly a way as possible. Like, look, there's all this opportunity out there. We don't have to be growing stuff that doesn't make us any money. We're in a bit more of a financial crunch now than we were a year ago, And, but the message is still the same. We don't have to be here. And we also don't have to keep blaming policy and the guys down at the grain elevator, because this is your land. If you're farming, this is your land. If you're renting that ground, it's your operation still. And the preferences of the people around you, what your landowner wants, those are going to play a role. But ultimately, you've been in charge of your business. So it's just kind of we need to seize control of our narrative here in agriculture.
So, I know you've done some videos about things like a paleo diet, sea cow ranch, shrimp, raw milk. So these are things that are a bit out of the ordinary compared to some of your more obvious videos about policy and politics and whatnot. So I wanted to ask you about three things that I think most people don't really think of as farming or agriculture, but are in a way. One is ocean farming. Where what do you know about that and your opinions about that? Whether it's for fish or for seaweed. Then there's hydroponic farming. Is that something that has any impact in today's culture? And third is the idea of cultured meat, that technology. Do you think that's feasible in the next 10 or 20 years? And as an alternative towards factory farming, for animals that are treated in a very depraved fashion. So, do you have any comments on any of those three things?
Sure. Well, I've worked a lot with hydroponics and some with farming seaweed. To be clear, I make some of those videos just as like a break from very grim farm policy. Like,
Yeah,
there's only so long you can be like slavery's back
yeah.
before you get depressed. You just have to do something else. I don't actually think we should farm sea cows. That was a gosh.
Yeah, I was
There's
just
the
thinking about
folks, yeah. There's
that.
the folks talking about de-extincting animals, and like if you want to raise something in the wild that hasn't been there for a while, it's basically like farming it. You have to figure out how to grow it in the wild, ranch it, that kind of thing. That's
Yeah,
what we're
Russia
talking about
Russia
there.
actually has a park devoted to bringing back the woolly mammoths.
Yeah, there's a lot of people working on de-extincting different kinds of things. I'm like, well, you know, ranchers could probably teach you some things about bringing back large animals and then managing them in a large wild environment. So that's worth taking a look at. Um, agriculture might have some lessons here, but I have worked with some folks working on farming seaweed. That's actually a huge business in China.
Mm.
And then in the US, they're kind of working on trying to farm kelp. There were some folks trying to figure out how to do it in the Gulf of Mexico because we have all these abandoned oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico.
Mm.
And per law, you either have to repurpose it or take it down, within a certain amount of time after the gas deposit
Yeah.
emitter runs out. And here's the thing, sports fishermen do not want you to take the rigs out because it's a hard reef. Like there's a reef that grows up around the base of that thing, and they're amazing fishing spots. They're like the only place you can get red snapper in a lot of the Gulf of Mexico. And so they're like, if you take these things out, we're going to be so mad. So you have to find another use for them. And so some folks are thinking, what if we could use them to farm seaweed? Because the Gulf of Mexico has a lot of excess nutrient pollution in there anyway, so seaweed can help soak it up. That could be a way to absorb some rare earth metals out of the seawater as they're coming out of the Mississippi. There's a very large drainage basin. Some rare earth metals come out of that. So if you can farm seaweed, maybe you can pick up some of that and have a strategic rare earth metal supply. There's a lot of cool things you can do with farming seaweed. So I worked with some folks, just trying to. It's kind of in the R&D phase. There's a lot of logistics when it comes to farming seaweed. So they're just kind of working on figuring that out. The harvest mechanics are pretty tough. The way they do it in China is they just hand labor because labor is pretty cheap over there. But if you're going to do it in the US, you'd have to automate that. So how do we make a combine, for harvesting seaweed? That's what we're going to have to do to make it work here. So I was kind of working with some folks on that, like how do you actually automate this? Hydroponics, I've worked with that quite a bit. Basically like most greenhouses, they're hydroponic. That is like really the only. If you do that you can do that in soil, but like it just works a lot better if you do a hydroponic. Hydroponic got a reputation for making tasteless tomatoes. That was mostly because the folks who were doing it at first were getting paid by the pound, and so if you turn on the water right before you pick, then the tomatoes are nice and plumped out, so you get a good weight, but then the flavor is kind of diluted. That's how they got that reputation. You can actually grow really flavorful stuff because you can also grow them for more flavor. You can turn the water off a little bit so they're a little bit dehydrated and the flavors kind of constant, like not enough that they get wrinkly. That's sad. Or they actually found out if you put a little bit of salt in the water right before you harvest tomatoes, cantaloupes, a few other things, melons, the flavor gets a lot more intense. And so he can run greenhouses to make really, really flavorful produce. That just wasn't really understood when greenhouses first started out. So they got a reputation for watery stuff. Um, but yeah, hydroponics absolutely have a role. I think it's something that's actually pretty underutilized in the US. Um, Leafy greens, for example, really easy to grow in hydroponics. That works out really well. And the alternative is in the US, we're getting like all of our lettuce from this one valley in California, the Salinas River Valley. Yeah, so by the time it makes it anywhere east of Mississippi, like it's just gross. Like it's not in good condition anymore. It's not fun to eat. We lived in Wisconsin for a while when I was a kid. Iowa, like my dad just moved around a lot for work. Um, and so I just remember like, why do people, it was when salad was getting big, right? That's just like, why do people like salad? It's so gross and sad. And then I went to California and they're like, have a salad. And I was like, oh, this is actually good. Oh, like by the time it gets to Wisconsin, it's like it's kind of like beat up. It's watery, like there's bruise spots all over it. It's not very good. Um, there's really no reason we have to be shipping all of our lettuce from this one valley in California. It grows pretty well anywhere with just a little bit of like greenhouse and hydroponics. That's just not something we do in the U.S. So that's why we're shipping it from California.
And any thoughts on cultured meat?
Uh, I'm more of a produce and vegetable person. That's just not
Okay.
something I've really been keeping up on. It's an area that's developing really rapidly.
Hmm.
Like you'd have to really be on top of the news to know, like, oh, it's looking good this week or whatever. And that's just not an area that I'm paying a ton of attention to. I'm like really focused more on, plants, veggies, grains, legumes,
Well,
the bottom of the food chain. It's kind of my thing.
well, I had mentioned that I've worked many years in the retail side of grocery, especially, and I can tell you that the big chains, the waste of food is absolutely staggering, and there are many causes for different stuff for different foodstuffs, but I mean, it's ridiculous. In France, for example, I read a few years ago that 7 days before foods are supposed to go out of date, they legally have to pull them and give them to the homeless shelters or the local food banks that they have in France, and we don't do that here. But is there what percentage of on the wholesale side is waste, and is it a big problem, or is that more on the retail side?
It's more on the retail side.
Yeah.
The wholesale, like the wholesale part of the food system is very, very streamlined. And then once it gets to the shelf, it either gets bought in time or it doesn't. Then that thing about where France a week, so okay, there's been a lot of discourse about expiration dates, and they're like, oh, but it says the best by date, and that means you think that means you're supposed to throw it away, but you're not. That's the week before when you're supposed to pull it from the shelves and you can donate to a food pantry. We actually do that quite a bit in the U.S. That's what the best by date is, as opposed to like the expired date.
Yeah.
A best by date is just like, hey, just so you know, if you eat it after this, it might not taste good. Don't blame us. It's just not that fresh anymore. That doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
expired. That's what a best by date means. Just don't blame us if it doesn't taste good. Expired is when it's not good for you anymore.
Yeah.
And it's so wild too because like there's some conspiratorial thinking around, like, oh well, I just want you to throw it out so you have to buy more. Excuse you, we want you to eat it all and think it's delicious, so then you'll buy more. That's why we want you to do that. Because generally speaking, if you wind up throwing something out before you eat it, that means you didn't like it and you're not going to buy more. So I don't know why people think food companies want that to happen. Like, no, they want you to eat it all up, be like, that was delicious, I'm coming back for more. Um, those are just like the best by and expiring dates are we don't want you to get food poisoning and blame us, and then we don't want you to eat something that's not that fresh and then blame us and think it was a bad product. That's what those are for. Those are in the interest of keeping the consumer informed, making sure that people have good information about the condition of the food they're eating. Those are not about manipulation. Those are making sure people have the info about what they're about to eat.
Uh, so
Yeah.
as we wrap up this interview, let me just ask you, well, what is your goal for the future, both immediately in the next year, say, and 5 or 10 years from now? Do you hope to use YouTube as a springboard to get these issues out? If let's say you would, or if you would plan to run for an office somewhere in the future, um, what is your end goal with YouTube, and how does that fit into your overall life, financial planning?
Sure. A TBD. I'm just kind of taking it day by day at this point. Like we're just
Uh-huh.
in such a crazy time for what's happening in our food system. And like I'm 42, which for a farmer means I'm very, very young. I've got a long agricultural career ahead of me, and I would like there to be a food sector for me to be in for more than a decade after
Mm-hmm.
this. You know what I mean? So it's really just a fight to make sure that there is a food sector to be in. Everything after that is greedy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it's that bad. That's kind of where
Well,
we're at right now. And then what is that going to look like? Are we just going to bail out the soy thing, or are we going to go, hey, maybe this is a great opportunity to reevaluate what we're doing and why? That's really just what I'm focused on right now. So,
yeah, one of the things I know that uh, I had a very popular website, and it's still popular, Cosmoetica.com. And this started in '01, and for 15 or so years it was a very popular site for the arts. But then when YouTube came along, people who were barely reading then, I get 1/10,000th of the presence on YouTube that I did, and I said, I'm not going to try to make a YouTube channel where I can try to make money. I just want to put out information about art. And you, however, I think have sort of threaded the needle between being AI or YouTube slop, even before AI came along, just the garbage that's just out there. And one of the reasons I wanted to interview you was because you mixed the informative in a very kind of basic way compared to many other sites. And I still think, and one of the reasons to do these interviews is that intelligent conversation is something that is missing in social discourse. And so I think you've sort of threaded the needle. And I just wanted to tell you that, in my opinion, I think that's where you should you try different stuff, but to stay centered on your opinions and putting them out there in a very outward and non-biased way, or as little biased as you can, because I think it's very much needed.
I appreciate that. You're too kind. When I think like the secret to like maintaining your balance in the age of AI slop or whatever, is just have something to say. And I think you may have found this as well as like in that transition from the blog and website era to Web 2.0. You might not necessarily be that interested in transitioning to Web 2.0, but you still had something to say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And that is going to keep you moving forward in a way that just wanting to be famous is not,
yeah,
is my guess.
yeah,
And yeah, I like there's everybody on the internet. There's a lot of people on the internet who actually have something to say, and I really respect that. And then you can kind of like other folks, it's kind of evident they just want to be famous, and I can't really blame people given the way the economy works right now.
yeah.
Fame is a way more reliable route to a comfortable lifestyle than just normal work at this point. And I think that's something that the leadership of our country should think deeply about. They're always complaining about kids these days don't want a real job, they want to be on YouTube, and I'm like, well, look at their real jobs.
Yeah.
You tell me why that is. But yeah.
Well, one of the jobs that has come along in the last 10, 15 years is what they call cyber archaeology. And I think that
Mm.
as these people preserve the worthwhile stuff, I think quality will win out in the end. The YouTuber who's giving makeup tips as a 14-year-old girl how to make the homecoming king look at her, that's going to go away. The AI slop will eventually just overwhelm and go to the side. So I think that quality will out in the end. So I do want to thank you, Sarah Tabor. Channel is Farm to Tabor, for spending an hour or so speaking about your channel and your opinions on agriculture.
Oh, you're too kind. Thanks for having me on. I believe in the 14-year-old doing makeup tips. She will find things to say. She may not be there yet, but she's gonna find her voice.
Okay,
So
thank you.